Right, so trade union civil war with Starmer hasn't been the only news coming out of Labour's National Policy Forum this weekend, because he's been busy binning other policy pledges too, of course. An event laid on with members of the Labour movement from across the country to make policy, shape policy, and Starmer has just set about breaking it instead. Let's start with Sure Start, shall we? Starmer has come out against it in the name of tough choices having to be made to balance the books. So again, the problems of the country are being paid for off the backs of those with the least. And again, it's an attack on children, after already having come out against his own pledge of universal free school meals and against his own pledge to abolish the two-child benefit cap. I don't often give Tony Blair props for anything, but Sure Start truly was a brilliant idea. He might have only introduced it as a sweetener to appease the left, whilst he got on with being utterly rancid elsewhere. But it meant a lot to struggling parents suddenly with a route back into work or education for themselves to better themselves with. And one person that has in the past extolled the virtues of the Sure Start programme as something she personally benefited from is the current Deputy Labour leader, Angela Rayner. Back when there was still some life in her, before she became Dead-eyed Ange. She was all for restoring Sure Start to what it had been before the Tories got in and took a hatchet to it, to what it had done for her as a young teen mum, enabling her to finish her studies, go on to work in the trade union movement, and give her son the preschool opportunities that both social interaction and early years education brings. What had formerly been the preserve of those with money to enable them to send their kids to preschool, the divide between the chances of the haves and have-nots, mitigated at that early level. The Tories took a bonfire to the scheme, really. Back in 2017, Rayner, then in Corbyn's shadow cabinet, pledged £500 million to restore Sure Start should they get elected in 2017. Now it's not even a topic on the table. Starmer is chasing Conservative votes, you see, and both fiscal discipline and stuff that doesn't directly appeal to them, able to send their kids off to the local Montessori School or whatever, so Sure Start is off the table. Representing ordinary working class people as Labour is meant to do isn't what Starmer is actually doing, and Rayner, well, she just sits in silence these days whilst he gets on with it. The thing is, it's not like it's unaffordable to do either. When Labour brought Sure Start in 1998, the national debt had been quadrupled and interest rates following Black Wednesday in 1992 were still substantial. Thatcher and Major had riddled the country with debt, and still Blair and Brown got Sure Start off the ground. There was a desire to do something to show they were still on the side of ordinary people back then. They proved it is all about political choice, but there's none of that under Starmer. He's hardline. We can't afford anything for you, and that's final. Actually, it's making what is likely to be in the next Labour manifesto look all the more bleak and anything but about to change, because he's ruling so many things out. What exactly is going to end up being ruled in? Some might say, well, he's bound to U-turn on a lot of this. He's going to have to give ground, but there's been zero sign of him ever bending to the will of others. He's a control freak, drunk on power. He hasn't even won yet. And his treatment of the trade unions at the same policy forum shows that. If you think he'll backtrack, you're mad. And when his shadow chancellor is just as unwilling to budge as he is in the name of fiscal restraint, the economy is being shrunk for the sake of argument, not in any way being engineered to be able to work for us, as it is meant to. We're all suffering and going to keep on suffering for the sake of an economy where political choice has placed it above us. And all of this is just political choice, as I've said. If what Starmer and Reeves say now is right, Blair and Brown would never have delivered Sure Start. They would never have been able to get it off the ground. They'd have said, well, that's ridiculous, we can't afford that. Yet they did. The rich don't need Sure Start, though. They have private education instead. That's the equivalent for them. Like the Tories, Starmer is appealing to a small group of older, wealthy, Conservative voters in the swing seats only, which are the only ones that really matter if it comes to him getting into number 10. Both main parties are chasing the same small group of votes and small group of voters, assuming the rest of their bases will just fall into line, whatever. Are you that gullible? Is Starmer right about you and your vote going to him regardless of everything he says or does? I'd argue that's not necessarily the case. I would certainly hope it isn't, and certainly not based on the recent by-election results, particularly the Uxbridge one, which Labour narrowly lost. If it was such an anti-Tory by-election, how come they held it? You less to blame? Maybe not, but not in the, or maybe, but not in the way you might be thinking. Certainly not in the way Labour might be thinking, given that the Green Party increased their vote share there. But I'll cover that in another video, not here. To me, it does shine a light on there being no enthusiasm for Starmer, for as much as there might be enthusiasm to get the Tories out, though. Those vocally calling people like me criticising Starmer for being an obviously rampant red Tory enablers miss the point completely as to why people like me hold him to account like we do. He's actually missed a massive trick here as well. He could have backed Sure Start and earned the nickname Sir Sure Starter. He could have buried the kid Starmer one. Oh well, I guess that one will have to stick all the more now, won't it? Sure Start wasn't the only letdown at the NPF, though, from Starmer. He's indulged in some epic gaslighting in a speech he's given there, where he only compared himself to Bevan. He made a speech saying his Labour Party are the real Bevanites now, as he bastardised the great man's words, saying, Bevan said, the language of priorities is our religion. But they sometimes forget the rest of his argument in that speech, that only by possession of power can you get the priorities correct. That's what he said. He was right. No, Keith, that's not all he said, and you completely hatcheted it to change the context completely into backing your lust for power's sake. What Bevan actually said was, the language of priorities is the religion of socialism, and you're allergic to that, kid Starver, so let's not pretend you're anything like Bevan. He would have looked at you in abject disgust and likely referred to you as lower than vermin, as he did for all Tories. The quote Starmer tore apart and misinterpreted ironically refers to policy making and the fact that it is for Labour conference to decide. The full, unadulterated quote by Bevan from a speech he gave in 1959 to the Labour Party conference is, if we manage to get a majority in Great Britain by the clever exploitation of contemporary psychology, and we did not get the commanding heights of the economy in our power, then we did not get the priorities right. The argument is about power and only about power, because only by the possession of power can you get the priorities correct. Therefore, I agree with Barbara Castle, and I agree with Hugh Gateskill, and I agree with myself that the chief argument for us is not how we can change our policy so as to make it attractive to the electorate. That is not the purpose of this conference. The purpose is to try, having decided what our policy should be, to put it as attractively as possible to the population, not just to adjust our policy opportunistically to the contemporary mood, but to cling to our policy and alter its presentation in order to win the suffrage of the population. That is our job, and I hope that is exactly what is going to emerge from this conference. Power for power's sake when they haven't got their priorities straight for the country is a failure, in his words. Policy should be decided on the basis of progressive need, and that vision should be made as attractive to voters as possible. He also said it is not the purpose of conference to try and change policy, but so as to make it as attractive as possible to the electorate. Well, that is exactly what Starmer is doing. He's shaping policy to appeal to Tories and claims he's like Bevan when he's doing it, and uses parts of a Bevan quote that actually, when you read the whole thing, says fully the exact opposite of what Starmer thinks it does. Between Sure Start misquoting Bevan to excuse his policy twisting and turning, lying basically, the two-child benefit cap, universal free school meals, wage rises, equal pay between men and women, driving trade unions to boycott dinner with him, there's a lot he's turned his back on. He's appealing for Tory votes whilst losing more votes behind his back. 3 by-elections this week with 3 very different sets of results show he's hedging his bets on his polling too much, believing his own hype too much. And he's in for a shock sooner or later. Thanks for watching. I hope you found the video useful. Please like, share and subscribe if you did. More content posted daily. Meanwhile, here's another video recommendation for you. The Selby and Ainsty by-election results, which was Starmer's only win. But there were warning signs you should heed here too. And, well, I'll hopefully catch you on the next vid. Cheers, folks.